He stepped on the blanket before my daughter could even open her mouth. I can still hear the soft drag of his shoe against that yarn, like it was something dirty somebody had left too close to the door. I can still see the heel of it pressing down on 10 months of my hands, my patience, my love. And the worst part is not that he did it. The worst part is that the room let him. My name is Cassandra Hale, and that night I sat on the edge of a motel bed with that same blanket folded across my lap so neatly, you would have thought nothing had happened to it at all. The air conditioner rattled and hummed like it was fighting for its life, and I just sat there looking down at the cream-colored yarn and the little soft green border I had added because Brianna once told me, years ago, that green made a room feel calm. My body was still hot with shame. My face was not. I had gone too still for crying. I had not seen my daughter in almost 2 months when I walked into that apartment. I came in smiling, not loud, not needy, just happy. Happy the way a mother gets when she has carried something all that way in both hands and still believes it will be received with love. I had wrapped the blanket carefully before leaving home, then unwrapped it in the parking lot because I wanted Brianna to feel it first, not peel it out of paper like something ordered online. When I stepped inside, the place was full but not crowded, decorated in pale colors and little gold letters. There was a table by the wall with desserts nobody had touched yet. There was music playing low, and there were women I did not know and 2 men near the kitchen laughing too loudly at something that was not that funny. Marcus saw me. He looked straight at me when I came through the door. Then he looked away. No smile, no wave, no good to see you. Not even the courtesy a man gives a neighbor he barely likes. Just one flat glance before he turned back to whatever he was saying. I noticed it. I felt it. Then I did what women like me have done too many times in this life. I excused it before it could settle. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he was hosting. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I walked to my daughter instead. She was standing near the gifts, one hand low against her stomach, pretty in a soft dress that made her look younger than she was. For one small second, when she saw me, her face opened. That was the part that hurt me later. There was love there. I know there was. I lifted the blanket toward her with both hands. Baby, I made... Marcus stepped between us so casually it almost looked affectionate. He took the blanket out of my hands with a little grin on his face, like he was joining the moment instead of interrupting it. Then he let it drop. Just let it slip. The blanket landed at his shoes. He looked at Brianna, not at me, and laughed under his breath. Your mom's just a lunch lady, darling. Then his shoe came down on it. Not hard. That would have at least admitted intention. No, he pressed into it lightly, dismissively, like it was trash he expected somebody else to pick up. A few people laughed right away. A few waited, then followed. One woman looked down into her cup, and my daughter said nothing. All right here. Tell me what time you're watching from, because I swear some wounds sound louder at night. I looked at Brianna and saw her freeze in the middle of herself. She did not smile. She did not defend me. She did not move toward me either. She just stood there with shame all over her face and no courage in her mouth. That silence struck harder than what he said. I bent down, picked up the blanket, folded it once. Then I walked out while the room was still deciding whether what had just happened was funny or ugly. By the time I reached the motel, I knew it was both. I sat on the bed for a long time before I reached for my phone. When Denise answered, I did not waste a single word. We need to act now. By 6:30 the next morning, I was back where people knew how to look me in the face, and the steam was already rising in soft white waves from the serving line when I tied my apron and pulled my hair back the way I had done for years. Trays clattered. Ovens clicked. Somebody in the back laughed too loud at something I missed. Then the first children came through the double doors in a rush of backpacks, sleep and hunger, and just like that, the room belonged to movement again. Morning, Miss Cass. Miss Hale, you got the good rolls today? One little boy slowed down just long enough to whisper, "You said if I passed that spelling test, I could get 2. I looked at him over my glove. "And did you?" He grinned and nodded so hard his glasses slipped. "Then get your 2 and keep moving." That was my world. Not loud, not shiny, just steady. Food hot on time. Children watched without making them feel watched. The extra fruit tucked onto a tray when I knew somebody needed it. A hand on a shoulder. A look that told the rowdy ones I had already seen them before they started anything. I did not run that cafeteria with noise. I ran it with rhythm. People felt it before they named it. That was why those words hit where they did. Just a lunch lady. As if there was something small about feeding people every day of your life and making sure children arrived to class with something warm in their stomachs and somebody in the building who knew when their smile was forced. As if quiet work had no weight because it did not come with a title on a glass door. By 9:30, Loretta from the register leaned against the prep counter and asked, "You staying late today?" "No," I said, checking the inventory sheet. "Everything's already handled." She smiled at that. "Of course it is." I didn't think much of it. I rarely did. I had built my life in a way that did not leave much room for panic. Bills paid when they were due. House note gone. Car modest, but mine. No cards, hidden in a drawer waiting to shame me. No debt dragging behind my name like a chain. Except for one place, I had made an exception. Around lunch, Veda came beside me with a crate of milk cartons and bumped my elbow lightly. "You're the only one I know with no debt left," she said. "That alone ought to let you sleep like a baby." I gave her a look. "Then why am I awake before the sun every day?" "Because peace and habit ain't the same thing," she said, and kept moving. That was Veda, always dropping truth like she was setting down a grocery bag. I didn't answer her, not out loud. Because 3 months earlier, I had sat in Denise Walker's office with a pen in my hand and a man across from me explaining numbers too quickly. Marcus had called it timing, called it opportunity, called it temporary support until things stabilized. Denise had called it something else. "Cassandra," she said that day, not unkindly, "you're not investing, you're securing him." I had looked at Brianna sitting beside him, hopeful, tired, already leaning toward the life she believed she was building, and I signed anyway. Not blindly, not foolishly, just mercifully. Back then, I told myself I was helping them start strong. Now, standing over trays of hot food and children asking for extra rolls, I understood something I should have named sooner. Stability doesn't just support people, it gets used by them. But the blanket had started 10 months earlier on a Tuesday night at my kitchen table. Cream yarn first, then the soft green edge later. Once I remembered Brianna telling me years ago that green made a room feel calm. I worked on it before dawn with coffee going cold beside me, and after long shifts, when my fingers should have been resting. I never rushed it. I fixed every uneven pull, started over when a row felt careless. Some nights, I would hold it up and imagine my grandbaby under it, breathing softly wrapped in something made by hands that already loved them. Back then, I was still trying to understand Marcus in the merciful way mothers do when they want their daughters' marriages to work. He had a polished mouth. That was his gift. He could say something sharp and smooth it over with a smile before the sting had fully landed. Then he liked correcting Brianna in front of people, but always lightly. "She means Thursday, not Friday." "No, baby, tell it right." "Let me explain." Little things. Small enough to dismiss if you wanted peace more than clarity. But there had been one moment I didn't dismiss. A week before the shower, he had called me in the evening, not to check on me, not to talk about Brianna, to ask, too casually, if I still had copies of the signed documents. "I just want to make sure everything's in order," he said. I remember pausing before answering, not because I didn't trust him, because for the first time, Something in his tone didn't need trust. It needed confirmation. "I keep my records where they belong," I told him. He laughed it off, but he didn't ask again. Veda saw him clearer than I did. One afternoon, after they had come by the school fundraiser together, she stood beside me stacking napkins and said, "That man doesn't talk down. He talks over." I remember frowning at her. Brianna seems happy. Veda didn't argue. She just gave me that look women give each other when they know time will finish the sentence. The day of the shower, I left home with the blanket folded beside me like a promise. By the time I reached the apartment building and parked, my legs were tired from the drive, but my heart was light. I picked the blanket up in both hands, closed my car door with my hip, and walked toward that apartment smiling, not knowing I had already been measured, used, and quietly placed outside the room before I ever stepped inside. By 7 the next morning, as I was back on the road with 6 hours of highway in front of me and a silence in my car so heavy it felt like another passenger, I had checked out of that motel without looking the woman at the desk fully in the face. Not because I was ashamed of what had happened. Shame had already done what it came to do. What sat in me now was something colder, something cleaner, the kind of feeling that does not shake you, it arranges you. The blanket was folded on the seat beside me. I did not touch it. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the miles begin. Morning light came up slow and pale over the road, washing everything in that thin color that makes gas stations, billboards, and rest stops all look lonelier than they are. I drove through it, remembering things I should have named sooner. Not dramatic things. That was the problem. And if Marcus had been loud from the start, I would have known what to do with him. Men like that make themselves easy to identify. But Marcus was polished, controlled. He liked power best when it wore a decent suit. He corrected the temperature of a room before anybody else could. If Brianna laughed too long at something I said, he would slide in with a softer version and take the moment back. If she answered a question too freely, he would smooth over her answer with one of his own. Not enough to start a scene, just enough to train the air around her, and she adjusted. That was the part I had not wanted to see. My daughter adjusted her voice, her timing, even her face around that man. She did it so gradually I told myself it was marriage, compromise, maturity, all the gentle names women give surrender when we are trying not to break our own hearts. What happened at that shower hurt because it was ugly, yes, but it hurt even more because it was familiar, not new, just louder, public, too plain to excuse. Around mid-morning, I pulled into a gas station off the highway and parked beside an ice machine humming against a brick wall. I did not get out right away. I just sat there with my hands still gripping the wheel and my eyes fixed on nothing. Because the truth was, I had not driven 6 hours just to hand my daughter a blanket. I had come to confront her husband, not emotionally, not loudly, precisely. 3 weeks earlier, Denise had called me after reviewing a document Marcus sent over. "Did he explain the second obligation to you?" she asked. "There's no second obligation," I told her. There had been a pause on the line. Then she said very carefully, "Then he's letting people believe something using your name that you haven't agreed to." That was the first time the ground shifted under me. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse. I did what I have always done when something doesn't sit right. I waited. I watched. And I planned to sit Marcus down, man to man without witnesses, and ask him one clean question. What exactly have you attached my name to that I did not sign? That was why I came. Not suspicion, confirmation. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for a moment. It was not heartbreak moving through me then. Heartbreak is hot. It trembles. It asks why. This was recognition. Recognition has no tears in it at first. It just stands there and makes old moments line up in a straighter row than they ever have before. The missed calls he returned too late, the answers that came too smooth, the way he asked about my documents without asking directly, the way Brianna started softening things before they fully formed. All of it had been there. I had just chosen not to pull it into one place, because pulling it together would have required action, and action changes things you can't always put back. I opened my eyes and looked at my hands still wrapped tight around the steering wheel. A man who could humiliate me in front of a room like that was not confused about who I was to him. He had already decided, not just emotionally, structurally. I stepped out of the car, bought gas, washed my hands longer than I needed to, and then got back in and kept driving. This time, I didn't let my thoughts wander. I let them settle. By the time I reached home, the sun had shifted and the day had gone flat around the edges. I didn't go inside. I drove straight across town, turned into a brick office park, parked in front of a gold-lettered glass door. And for the first time since that room full of laughter, I allowed myself to move without hesitation, because whatever I had been willing to handle quietly before, he had already made sure quiet was no longer an option. I picked up my bag, stepped out of the car, and walked into Denise Walker's office. Denise did not waste sympathy on me, and that was one of the reasons I trusted her. By the time I stepped into her office, she already had a legal pad open, a file pulled forward, and that still, a focused look on her face that told me she had been thinking even before I arrived. She stood, hugged me once, firm and brief, then motioned me into the chair across from her desk. "What happened?" she asked. I told it clean. Not every feeling, not every look in the room, just the facts that mattered. The shower, the blanket, Marcus's words, Brianna saying nothing, me leaving, me calling her from the motel. Denise listened without interrupting. The only change in her face came when I repeated his exact words. Something sharpened in her eyes, then settled. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and folded her hands. "All right," she said, "then we do it now." That word again. Now. I looked at the file on her desk, then back at her. "Tell me plain," I said. Then, after a second, quieter, "And don't skip steps. I need to understand what I'm actually sitting in." She nodded once. "After the wedding," she said, "you signed as guarantor for Marcus's business loan." "I know what I signed." "I know you do," she said calmly. "I'm saying it out loud because today is the day we stop treating it like family help and start treating it like legal exposure." That landed differently this time, not as memory, as consequence. Denise turned the file toward me and tapped a page I recognized, not by the words, but by the weight of it. "You guaranteed the original loan," she said. "That part is clean, but what's not clean is what's been built around it since." I frowned slightly. "Built how?" "3 months ago," she continued, "he submitted documentation tied to a secondary obligation." My eyes lifted. I didn't sign anything else." "You didn't have to," she said. I sat there for a second longer than I meant to. "Explain that part to me," I said, "because if my name is on something, I need to know where." That was when the room changed. Denise pulled another sheet forward. "He didn't forge your name. That would be easy to dismantle. What he did was allow your guarantor position to be interpreted as broader support than it actually is." I didn't speak. Not because I understood, because I was starting to. "He walked into other conversations carrying your stability behind him," she said, "and nobody corrected the assumption." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning people made decisions believing you were standing behind more than one structure." I exhaled slowly. "That's allowed?" I asked. Not defensive, just needing the line. "It's not clean," she said, "and it becomes a problem the moment someone asks the right question." That was worse, because it wasn't illegal in a loud way. It was leveraged. Denise leaned forward slightly. And now, she said, he's trying to move things before those assumptions get questioned. I felt my back straighten. That's what that call was about, I said quietly. What call? He asked if I still had copies of the documents. Denise didn't react dramatically. She just nodded once. That tells me he knows something is shifting, she said. And if he moves fast enough, he can reposition before your exposure is formally limited. I didn't like the word reposition. It sounded like something done quietly while other people carried the weight. Can I remove my name? I asked. Not instantly, she said. That's not how guarantor agreements work. I held her eyes. Then what can I do today? That question mattered. Denise saw that. But we can do 3 things, she said. She held up a finger. We freeze future exposure. A second, we trigger lender review. A third, and we formally restrict any restructuring without your written consent. Each one felt like a door closing somewhere I hadn't known was open. Denise slid a clean sheet toward her and uncapped her pen. If he's overextended, and he is, then timing is everything, she said. Right now, he's still operating on confidence. If we act before the questions start, we control the structure. If we wait until after, we're reacting to damage. I watched her hand move as she began drafting. Formal notice, review request, clarification of guarantor scope. Our consent restrictions. No noise, no threats, just pressure placed exactly where it belonged. That's why it had to be now, Cassandra, she said without looking up. Not tomorrow, not after you calm down. Now. For the first time since I left that apartment, anger gave way to something steadier, not softer, clearer. He had humiliated me while standing on support he had not built with his own hands. And worse than that, he had tried to stretch that support into something I never agreed to carry. Denise finished the first draft, scanned it once, then turned to her computer to formalize it properly. I sat there listening to the quiet rhythm of keys and paper, understanding something I hadn't fully accepted before. This was no longer about what he said in that room, and this was about what he had been doing long before he opened his mouth, and how long I had allowed it to stand without being named. By the time I got home, the sky had darkened into evening. I went into my bedroom, took the blanket from my bag, folded it carefully, and placed it in the back of my closet. Not out of pain, out of decision. Then my phone lit up on the dresser, Brianna calling. I looked at her name. Let it ring once, twice, 3 times, and for the first time in her life. I chose not to reach for her before she understood what she was standing inside. I watched the screen go black. The next afternoon, I sat in a smaller office with softer lighting, a ticking wall clock, and 2 people in front of me who had no use for fantasy. Denise was one of them. Mr. Tibbs was the other. And he had been handling my financial life long enough to read my face the way some people read weather. Quiet man. Careful with his words. Never one to perform concern just to make himself look attentive. His suit fit properly. His glasses sat low on his nose, and his expression said he had already reached the truth and was now deciding how gently to place it on the table. He opened the folder in front of him and looked at me. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "A little." He nodded like that told him everything he needed. The truth of my life had never been dramatic. No surprise inheritance. No hidden accounts waiting to astonish anybody. I built what I had the same way I made that blanket, row by row, with patience, correction, and time. My house was paid for. My car was mine. Now, my bills didn't follow me into new months like unpaid apologies. I kept money where it belonged, and I kept my name clean. That kind of life doesn't impress men like Marcus. It protects them. Mr. Tibbs slid one paper aside and rested his fingertips on another. "You were never the risk," he said. "You were the protection." Nobody spoke after that. I looked down at the papers, clean columns, steady history, years of quiet discipline laid out without ever asking for applause. And something in me tightened, not from surprise, from insult finding a deeper floor. Marcus had not chosen my name at random. He had chosen stability. He had chosen discipline. He had chosen the woman whose life had no leaks in it. And then use that life to patch holes he didn't want anyone to see. Mr. Tibbs turned the page toward me. "This," he said, and tapping a line halfway down, "is where it starts stretching." I leaned forward. It wasn't my signature, but it was my name, referenced, positioned, implied. A secondary credit request tied to his existing structure, approved under the assumption that the original guarantor strength extended further than the original agreement. "They didn't require a second signature," Mr. Tibbs said calmly. "They relied on the strength of the first." I felt my jaw tighten. "He let them believe I was standing behind this?" I asked. Denise answered that one. He didn't correct it. That was worse, because it meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. Mr. Tibbs turned another page. "And this," he said, "is a vendor extension. Different document, same pattern, deferred payment terms granted based on perceived financial backing. So my backing." "He's been buying time," Mr. Tibbs said, "using confidence as currency." I sat back slowly, not forged, not fabricated, positioned. He had walked into rooms carrying my name like collateral, without ever placing it down where it could be examined properly. Denise spoke again, steady as ever. "The lender review we triggered yesterday has already paused one process." "What process?" I asked. "This one," she said, tapping the same line Mr. Tibbs had pointed to. "The secondary obligation." That was the first real shift. Not theory, not suspicion, impact. "They've flagged it for clarification," she continued, "which means Marcus now has to explain something he was hoping would move quietly." I let that settle. For the first time, something in his world had stopped moving forward. Because of me. And Denise turned another sheet toward me, showing where lines connected. Loan, extension, timeline, dependency, not complicated, just layered. "He's built a structure that depends on momentum," she said. "As long as things keep moving, nobody asks too many questions. But the moment something pauses, everything gets looked at," I finished. Mr. Tibbs nodded once. "And when people start looking," he said, "they don't just look at one thing." I understood that. This was no longer just about one loan. It was about a system that only worked if nobody stopped to examine how it was standing. Denise tapped her pen once against the file. "That's why his behavior matters," she said. "Men like Marcus don't stop when they're ahead. They stretch. And when they stretch, they assume the strongest thing under them will hold." I didn't need her to say my name. I heard it anyway. "And when it doesn't?" I asked. She held my eyes. "They fall into whatever they've been covering." The room went quiet again. Not heavy, clear. I looked down at the documents one more time, then closed the folder gently. For the first time since this began, I wasn't thinking about what he said in that room. I was thinking about what he had been building behind it. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "How far out does this go?" Denise didn't soften it. She didn't guess. She didn't reassure. She met my eyes and said, calm and exact, "That's what we're about to find out." Nothing broke that week. That was how I knew it was working. Men like Marcus expect consequences to arrive loudly if they arrive at all. They expect a warning to come with heat, with accusation, with somebody losing control in a way they can point at later and call irrational. What Denise had set in motion did not move like that. It moved like a door that had always opened easily, suddenly catching at the frame. By Tuesday afternoon, she called me while I was wiping down my kitchen counter. "One process has slowed," she said. I leaned against the sink. Because of the notice? Yes, a lender requested additional review before proceeding. That was all she said at first, and that was all she needed to say. I had learned by then that real pressure rarely announces itself with a trumpet. It shows up as hesitation, a document left sitting a little longer than expected, a person asking a second question where they usually ask none, on time stretching where confidence once moved fast. Has he been told why, I asked? Not directly. Meaning Marcus would feel the shift before he understood the source of it. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there looking out my kitchen window at nothing in particular. For the first time since the shower, I felt something move in my chest that was not hurt and not anger. It was steadier than both, not relief, more like confirmation. The kind that comes when truth begins touching the edges of a man's life before he knows where to swat. The next sign came the following morning. Denise sent a short message. Another document has been flagged for review. Timeline slowing. Don't reach out to him. Let him feel it. I read that twice. Then I set my phone face down and went on with my day. At work, the children were loud in the way children are loud when they have no reason yet to distrust the day. I was grateful for that. One little girl in braids asked me why I looked tired, and I told her grown folks ask too much of a week sometimes. She nodded like that made perfect sense and asked for an extra spoon. I gave it to her. By the time I got home, my phone was ringing. Brianna. I looked at her name long enough to feel the old reflex rise in me, the one that says answer quickly, soften first, make room. Then I answered on the fourth ring. Hello? Silence met me for half a breath. Then my daughter said, Hey, Mama. She sounded careful. Not tender, careful. Brianna. I was just calling to... She stopped, then started again. Things have been busy. I said nothing. I know the shower got awkward, she said. No, it just... Everybody was talking and it was a lot happening at once, and Marcus was trying to keep everything light. Keep everything light. I closed my eyes for 1 second. That's what you call it? I asked. She inhaled softly, the way people do when they know they are already losing the shape of the sentence they came prepared to say. I'm not saying it was right, but you're not saying it was wrong either. Another pause. I just think maybe it got taken harder than it was meant. There it was. Not apology, not honesty, just soft cloth laid over a sharp thing. Before I could answer, I heard movement on her end, not loud, just close enough to change the air. Then Marcus's voice came through in that same smooth tone I had heard him use 100 times when he wanted control to sound reasonable. So end the call. He did not sound angry. That was the part that finished it for me. No panic, no confusion, no shock that she had reached for me. Just calm instruction, like my daughter's voice was another faucet in his house, and he had decided it had run long enough. Brianna went quiet, and in that quiet, I finally understood the full shape of what I had been looking at. Not a rude man, not a difficult marriage, control. On the other end, I heard him again, lower this time. Not for me, but not hiding either. Now. I opened my eyes and said very clearly, Tell your husband something has already changed. Then I ended the call. By the end of that week, I did not need Denise to tell me Marcus had started talking. I could hear it in the pauses. Not silence, not open rejection either. Something thinner than that, something polite. Nanya cousin, who normally answered on the second ring, let my call go to voicemail, then texted 2 hours later, Sorry, been busy. An older church sister, who never used to say my name with caution, suddenly stretched it too carefully across the phone, like she was stepping around broken glass. Even the warmth in certain greetings had changed, not gone, just trimmed. That is how stories move when a man like Marcus gets to them first. He doesn't come with wild accusations. He comes with posture, with sorrow, with that patient little shake of the head that makes people feel like they're hearing the reasonable side before trouble starts. I could almost hear him. Cassandra took it the wrong way. She's emotional right now. It was a joke that landed badly. You know how older people can get when they already don't like something. And that kind of talk doesn't need everybody to believe it. It only needs enough people to hesitate. And some of them did, because if they were honest, they had already placed me where Marcus needed me. Respectable, yes. Hard-working, yes. But simple, predictable. The kind of woman whose hurt could be mistaken for oversensitivity because her life didn't advertise itself in expensive language. I learned that lesson properly when I called my cousin Rochelle on Saturday morning. We had grown up like sisters, shared bedrooms in summer, whispered through funerals, stood beside each other at too many family tables to count. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hey, Cass." Her voice was soft in a way that told me she had already heard something and didn't want to be the one to say she had heard it. "Hey." A pause. Then she said, I heard there was some kind of misunderstanding at the shower." Misunderstanding. That word sat between us so ugly I almost laughed. "I see," I said. "She said folks were drinking a little and talking loud and things just got out of hand." She said, "Not Brianna, not Marcus, just she, drifting in the room like gossip does when it wants to avoid responsibility." I asked, "Did anybody tell you what he said?" Another pause, longer this time. Then Rochelle sighed, quiet but clear. "Cass, you don't want me repeating everything people are saying." That was new, not ignorance, participation. I felt something in my chest settle into a harder shape. "What are they saying?" I asked. She hesitated again, then softer. "That maybe you already didn't like him, and it just came out wrong that day." There it was, not confusion, narrative. And I let that sit between us without rushing to clean it up. "So that's what you believe?" I asked. "I didn't say that." "You didn't say you didn't either." Silence. We ended the call kindly enough, but when I put the phone down, something in me settled a little deeper. This wasn't just a controlling man. This was a man who understood timing. Because while he was shaping how people saw me, something else had already started shaping how people saw him. Denise confirmed that Monday. "This isn't defense," she said when I sat across from her. "It's delay." I looked at her. "Meaning?" "Meaning if he can make you sound unstable, bitter, or confused, then any question you raise later gets filtered through that first." That was Marcus all over, not solving the danger, just softening the witness. Then Denise turned her monitor slightly toward me. "We found something else." Her tone didn't rise. It sharpened. "Yesterday morning," she said, "Marcus contacted a financial intermediary connected to the loan structure." I didn't speak. "He did it without disclosing that your position has changed, without acknowledging the notice, without clarifying that review is already underway." I felt my back straighten. What does that mean? It means he tried to keep a process moving under assumptions he now knows are no longer clean. She clicked something on the screen and turned it a little more toward me. An email thread. Short. Careful. Too careful. "He requested expedited handling," she said, "pushed for timeline acceleration, framed it as routine." "And they agreed?" I asked. Dunno. That word landed heavier than anything else she had said. "They flagged it," Denise continued, "internally, requested clarification before proceeding." That was the second shift, not in conversation, in process. "And that's not all," she added. She pulled up another note. "A vendor he's been working with pushed back." I looked up. "Not delayed," she said. "Pushed back. Asked for partial upfront payment before releasing anything further." That was different. That was resistance. "Why?" I asked. "Because confidence isn't holding the way it did last week," she said. "And when confidence slips, people start protecting themselves early." I sat still. For the first time, something outside of our office had moved against him, not quietly, deliberately. He's trying to outrun the review, Denise said. Then keep momentum going before the questions reach the right desks. And can he? I asked. She held my eyes. For a moment, she said. Maybe. That made me still. But not cleanly, she added, and not for long. I leaned back slowly, so while Marcus was out there managing perception, his structure was beginning to resist him, not collapse, not yet, but hesitate. And hesitation is where confidence starts to crack. Denise tapped the desk once, not for emphasis, but for clarity. That's not just risky, Cassandra, she said. She let the silence sit just long enough, then finished it clean. That's exposure. I told the truth out loud for the first time on a Thursday evening over weak diner coffee and eggs. Neither one of us was hungry enough to finish. Veda had chosen the place because it sat off the main road. Then with old booths, scratch tables, and the kind of waitress who refilled your cup without asking questions. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The room smelled like grease, syrup, and wet pavement. It should have felt ordinary. It didn't. By then, nothing ordinary stayed ordinary long. Veda waited until I had wrapped both hands around my mug before she asked, "You ready to say it plain yet?" I looked at her. She looked right back. There are some friends who offer comfort first because they can't bear your face when it's hurting. Veda wasn't built that way. She had mercy, yes, but it came with bone in it. I knew he was controlling, I said. The words sat there between us, hard and overdue. I knew he liked to manage people. I knew he corrected too much. I knew he always needed the room to bend his way. I swallowed once. I just never thought it would come at me like that. Not directly, not in front of everybody. Veda nodded slowly. Because you thought being her mother put a line there. Yes, and because you thought respect would do what boundaries were supposed to do. That one landed without warning. I looked down at the coffee. Maybe. No, she said. Not maybe. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was clean. You saw it, she said. You just chose peace over clarity. I let that hurt me. Outside, headlights slid over the window and moved on. Somewhere near the counter, silverware dropped into a tray with a sharp little clatter. I didn't want to make trouble for Brianna, I said. Veda leaned back. And now? Now was heavier than it sounded. Now my daughter had stood in a room while her husband stepped on something I made with love and said nothing strong enough to stop it. Now people were speaking to me in careful tones because his version had reached them first. Now Denise was finding out that the man I had helped steady might have been borrowing more from my name than I knew. Now, something else had started moving. My phone buzzed against the table. I didn't reach for it at first. Veda glanced down. You gonna check that? I picked it up. Denise. Short message. Another hold placed. Secondary review expanding. He's pushing harder. Call me when you can. I stared at it for a second longer than I meant to. Veda watched my face. That him? Or what he's built? What he's built, I said. That was the first time I said it without hesitation. She nodded once. Good. Means you're seeing it right. I set the phone face down. Now peace wasn't just expensive. It was already costing him. Veda stirred the ice in her water and said, quieter this time. Some daughters don't leave home ashamed of where they came from. They leave home ashamed of how the world might rank it. I looked up. She didn't soften the line. That class stuff gets in deep, she went on. A woman marries into a certain kind of room, starts hearing her life explained back to her in smaller words, and after a while, silence starts looking like survival. I thought about Brianna standing there with shame on her face and no courage in her mouth, not defending him, not defending me either, just trying not to be the next thing that broke in public. The waitress came by, topped off our cups, and left again. Then Veda said, I heard something. I stilled. Not gossip, she said immediately. Not friend of a friend foolishness. Somebody real. My chest tightened. There's a woman I know through my cousin's side. She does administrative contract work, numbers, scheduling, paper flow. She's crossed paths with people around Marcus's business before. I didn't interrupt. She didn't reach out to talk, Veda added. She reached out because she's trying to decide whether to protect herself. That made me look at her differently. From what? I asked. Veda leaned forward slightly. From being the one whose name ends up attached when things get pulled apart. That was new. That was weight. Reached out how? I asked. She asked if I still knew you, Veda said. Didn't say your name directly. It just described you. My fingers tightened slightly around the mug. That means she's careful, I said. That means she's already seen enough to be afraid, Veda corrected. Careful comes after that. I let that sit. What does she have? I asked. Not documents she's willing to hand over yet, Veda said, but she's seen patterns. What kind of patterns? Veda didn't rush it. Instructions changing late, she said. Payments expected that don't line up with what was promised. And one thing she said that stuck with me. I waited. She said he's been asking people to move things faster than the paperwork can justify. That tightened something in me. Meaning? I asked. Meaning he's trying to keep things moving before anybody slows down long enough to ask the right questions. That lined up, too cleanly to ignore. And there's more, Veda added. I watched her closely now. She said one account, just one, got partially funded from somewhere it shouldn't have been yet. I didn't speak. Not illegal on paper, Veda said, but out of order, like something was pulled forward to cover something else that hadn't arrived. That was the first real crack, not theory, movement. If somebody doesn't slow him down soon, she continued quieter now, whatever he's holding together is going to start falling where people can see it. I leaned back slowly. So this wasn't just internal pressure anymore. It was starting to misalign, not loudly, but structurally. And once structure starts slipping, people don't wait for collapse. They step away early. Veda watched me carefully. Before you say yes, she said, understand what yes means. I already did. And if someone inside his financial orbit started opening doors, whatever came through them wouldn't stop politely at Marcus. It would reach Brianna, her home, her comfort. Everything she was still trying to believe was stable. And if it came out wrong, it wouldn't just expose him, it would pull everything down at once. I looked down at the message still sitting on my phone screen, then back at Veda. Would she talk to Denise directly? I asked. Veda held my eyes. If she believes she won't be the one left holding it, she said. That was the real condition. Not truth, protection. I sat with that for a moment, then made my decision. Can she meet tonight? I asked. Veda didn't blink. I'll make the call. By the time the next week began, I stopped thinking of Marcus as reckless and started thinking of him as engineered. That is a different kind of danger. A reckless man breaks things because he lacks discipline. An engineered man builds his life in a way that lets other people mistake dependence for strength. He learns what rooms need to see, what words make people relax, what papers move faster when confidence arrives before questions. He doesn't have to lie everywhere. He just has to make sure the truth never stands alone. I was sitting in Denise's office again when that understanding finally settled properly in me. Mr. Tibbs was there too, glasses low on his nose, reading through a set of documents Denise had printed and marked. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling vent and the steady movement of paper. Nobody in that room needed drama to feel urgency. The air had already tightened. Denise looked at me first. Now we've got enough to stop guessing, she said. That was the closest thing to excitement she ever allowed into her voice. She turned a document toward me. Start here. I leaned forward. A timeline. Clean. Simple. Too clean. Original loan. Then 3 weeks later, vendor extension, then a deferred payment agreement tied to projected incoming funds, then a bridge request that had been paused, all separate on paper, connected in reality. He stacked timing, Denise said. Everything depends on everything else arriving exactly when it should. Mr. Tibbs tapped the page once. And it doesn't, he said. That was the problem. Not fraud. Fragility. Denise flipped to the next sheet. This vendor here, she pointed to a name I didn't recognize, extended him 60-day terms instead of 30. Why? I asked. She didn't hesitate. All because they believed he had stable backing. My backing. She turned another page. This intermediary flagged his request yesterday. Not denied, flagged. That means they're asking questions before moving forward. And if the answers don't hold? I asked. They slow everything, she said. And when one part slows, the rest doesn't adjust cleanly. Mr. Tibbs leaned back slightly. It starts to bunch, he said. Cash in one place, obligation in another, pressure building in between. Denise nodded. And when pressure builds, she added, people start protecting themselves. She slid another document toward me, an internal note, short, neutral, but clear enough. Further clarification required before proceeding. Existing guarantor scope under review. I stared at it. That was my name, without my name being written. He's been moving under assumptions, Denise said. Now those assumptions are being questioned in writing. That was the shift. Not emotional, structural. I leaned back slowly. So while Marcus was still speaking confidently in rooms, those same rooms were starting to look at him twice, not yet pulling away, but no longer leaning in. Denise rested her pen against the paper. He isn't fake, she said, and that made me look at her. That's why this matters. If he were fake, he'd be easier to dismantle. Mr. Tibbs nodded once. He's built enough real movement to pass inspection at a glance. But not under pressure, Denise added. She tapped the timeline again. He stretched real structure too far, and when men like Marcus stretch too far, they start leaning on whatever looks strongest beneath them. I didn't need her to say my name. I heard it anyway. For a moment, I thought back to the baby shower. Not the insult this time, but the confidence underneath it. The ease, the casualness. A man who could humiliate me that publicly was not simply arrogant. He was certain I would absorb it, certain I would remain where he placed me. Small, emotional, useful, quiet. He needed me to stay that way, because I was part of what held him up. The realization didn't bruise me the way it might have a week earlier. It sharpened me. Denise slid a yellow legal pad toward the center of the desk and drew 3 clean lines down the page. Here's how we move, she said. She tapped the first line. Your guarantor leverage. The second. The irregularities in timing and representation. The third. The internal documentation now starting to surface. She looked at me. None of these break him alone. Mr. Tibbs leaned forward slightly. But together, he said, they force people to stop assuming. That was the real pressure, not exposure, interruption. Denise picked up her phone. The first call was measured, professional, quiet. Just confirming the review remains active, yes, and that no restructuring proceeds without updated consent. She ended it cleanly. The second call was shorter, colder. That will need to be flagged before anything moves. She hung up, made one note in the margin of her pad, then looked back at me. It's live now, she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. Somewhere. Something Marcus expected to move. Wouldn't. Not because of noise, because of doubt. And doubt, once it enters a system built on confidence, doesn't leave quietly. I sat there, feeling something settle into place inside me. No victory, no relief, just the steady understanding that whatever he had built had finally started carrying its own weight. The truth about my daughter did not arrive like a blow. It arrived like a hand turning over one last card you were still begging life not to show you. I was in Denise's office when it happened, sitting in the same chair I had worn into familiarity over the last week, with my purse at my feet and my hands folded so tightly in my lap my knuckles had gone pale. The blinds were half open. Late afternoon light cut across the carpet in narrow bands. And Denise was standing near the edge of her desk with one sheet of paper in her hand and a face so controlled I knew before she spoke that whatever was on that page was not going to leave me where it found me. She didn't know everything, Denise said. My stomach tightened anyway, but she knew enough. There are sentences a mother hears in stages. That was one of them. The first part enters your ears. The second part enters your bones. I looked at Denise and said nothing. She came around the desk and sat instead of standing over me. I appreciated that. Some truths do not need height added to them. The contact was careful, she said. No dramatics, no guesses, just specifics. Brianna was present for at least one conversation about the pressure around the loan. She knew there were concerns. She knew Marcus was trying to hold certain things together, and she knew your name was part of what gave him breathing room. I swallowed once. No tears came. That almost scared me more than tears would have. What exactly did she know? I asked. Denise glanced down at the page, then back up. Enough to question him, enough to call you, enough to understand that what he was presenting publicly and what was happening privately were not the same thing. The room went very quiet after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, because too much had just been said cleanly all at once. My mind did what minds do when the present becomes unbearable. It reached backward. I saw Brianna at 9 years old in the school cafeteria, her skinny legs swinging from the end of a bench while I finished wiping down the last serving counter after open house night. One of the teachers had laughed gently and said, "Your mama works hard, doesn't she?" Before I could answer, Brianna had lifted her chin and said, "Proud as morning, my mom feeds everybody. That's important." I remember the way she said, important, full and certain, like it was obvious, like nobody in the room could possibly mistake my work for something small. That little girl loved me out loud. I came back to the office slowly, like surfacing through dark water. The woman at the baby shower had my daughter's face, but she was not that girl. That was the grief of it. Not that Brianna had turned evil. Evil would have been easier to understand. No, she had turned accommodating, soft where she needed to be firm, be silent where she needed to be clear. She had chosen comfort over conflict, and then chosen it again, and then one more time after that until silence started looking to her like neutrality. It wasn't neutrality, it was a side. I asked Denise, did she protect him? Denise took her time answering. Maybe not in her heart, she said, but in effect, yes. That was the line that finished the work. I leaned back in the chair and looked toward the window, where the light had shifted lower and made everything in the office look more separate from itself. Desk from chair, glass from frame, one world from another. I thought I might feel rage then. I didn't. Rage would have been warmer, more alive. What I felt was quieter, a closing, not anger, access. And the part of me that had still been leaving the door open for Brianna inside my mind, the part that kept making room, translating weakness into confusion, waiting for her to arrive with the right sentence, that part went still and locked itself. I stood up, picked up my purse, and finally looked back at Denise. When she calls again, I said, I will know who I'm speaking to. Nothing restores a child's memory like certified mail. By 10:15 that morning, my phone had rung so many times it no longer sounded urgent. It sounded guilty. I was in my kitchen slicing strawberries I did not even want when the first call came through from Brianna. I let it ring. Then Marcus. Then a number I did not know. Then Brianna again. By the time I set the knife down, a voice note had landed. 2 missed calls sat back to back on my screen. One in my cousin Rochelle, who had suddenly learned how to be careful with me when his version of the story was making the rounds, had texted 3 words, "Call your daughter." I stared at that message longer than it deserved. Certified mail had done what pain could not. It had forced clarity into rooms where love had been easy to ignore. Denise warned me this would happen, not because the notice was loud, because it was undeniable. Paper changes people's tone faster than tears ever do. A phone call can be denied, a conversation can be reshaped, but a document with dates, signatures, and delivery confirmation has a way of making memory return all at once. My phone buzzed again. Brianna. I let it ring. Then came the voice note. Mama. Her voice shook on the first word, then tried to correct itself. I don't know what's happening, but Marcus said there's been some kind of notice and people are asking questions and... She stopped. Breathed in, tried again. Can you please call me? Please. Not because she had found her courage, because something had found her comfort. That was the difference. I pressed delete. Before the silence could settle, another call came in. Not from family, from a number I didn't recognize. I answered that one. Ms. Hale, a man said, clipped and careful. This is Aaron from Westbridge Supply. I was advised to confirm whether your guarantor position still stands as previously represented. There it was. Not emotion, not apology. Structure. I leaned my hip against the counter. Who advised you to ask that? A pause. Your name came up during internal review, he said. We were told there may have been a change. I let that word sit. A change, I repeated. Yes, ma'am. Before we proceed with shipment, we need clarity. Shipment. So it had already reached that far. I looked out the window, watching nothing in particular. Then don't proceed, I said calmly, until you have it. Silence on the other end, then carefully, understood. He ended the call. That was the first time I heard it clearly. Not in Denise's office, not on paper, in the world. Things were stopping. My phone lit again. This time, Marcus's mother. I had heard from that woman exactly twice since the wedding, both times for holidays she treated like obligations. Now her name sat on my screen like we were family in crisis. I answered, not because I cared what she had to say, because I wanted to hear how fast contempt dresses itself up as concern. Cassandra, she said, too warm, too quick. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. I turned slightly, resting my hand against the counter. Is there? I'm sure whatever this is, it can be handled privately. Handled privately. There it was, the language people use when they don't mean solve. They mean contain. What exactly have you been told? I asked. A pause. Only that some unnecessary legal steps have been taken. I almost smiled. Then that's all you need to know. Her tone tightened under the polish. I would hate to see emotions make something bigger than it has to be. Then you should have said that in your son's apartment. Silence. Not long, just long enough. Then she exhaled through her nose. No, this is not the time for pride. No, I said. It's the time for records. And I ended the call. That was the only conversation I gave anybody that day. After that, I let the phone do what frightened people make phones do. Ring, buzz, light up, beg. Rochelle called twice. Brianna sent a message. Please don't shut me out like this, as though the distance had begun with me. Another voicemail came through mid-afternoon. Different voice, same tone. Ms. Hale, this is a compliance officer following up on a flagged position connected to your name. We need to verify your current standing before further action is taken. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. The questions had already started traveling without me. by late afternoon, and I turned the sound off and sat in my living room with my hands folded and my feet flat on the floor, listening to the house breathe around me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt exact. Detached had been too soft a word. This was control. Not loud, not cruel, just clean. When the screen lit up again, I didn't even look right away. I already knew the shape of desperation once politeness stopped working. I had nothing left to say to them now. Denise did. The more they explained themselves, the clearer it became. They were never sorry about what happened at that shower. They were sorry paper had entered it. That truth came to me in pieces all through Friday afternoon, while my phone kept lighting up with people suddenly eager to be understood. Brianna called first, then texted, then sent a voice note so carefully worded it sounded like she had practiced sounding fragile without saying anything that could be pinned down later. Mama, we're all under a lot of stress right now. Marcus feels blindsided. I think everybody was triggered that day. Triggered. That word sat on my screen, dressed up like wisdom and landed like cowardice. I read it twice, then set the phone down and stared at the edge of my coffee table until the grain in the wood started looking like a map. By then, I had stopped waiting for honesty to arrive naturally. What I was listening for now was shape. Evasion has a shape. So does guilt. So does the kind of polished language people reach for when they want to manage consequence without ever kneeling before truth. The next message came from Brianna, too. Mama, I'm trying to process all of this in a healthy way. Then, I feel like there's been hurt on all sides. On all sides. I let out one short breath through my nose. That was when I understood it fully, not with anger. Anger had already done its work. This was colder than that, cleaner. They were not reaching for me because they had finally named what was done to me. They were reaching because the structure around Marcus had begun shifting in ways they could no longer soothe with tone. If Denise had not moved when she did, if paper had not started landing where it needed to land, Brianna would still be arranging soft words around a hard thing and asking me to call it balance. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. Mama, Brianna said immediately, relief breaking through so fast it offended me. Thank you. For what? For picking up. I said nothing. She inhaled shakily. I know things look bad. Look bad? That's not what I mean. Then say what you mean. The silence that followed was not long, but it was crowded. I could hear Marcus somewhere behind her, not speaking, just present enough to press on the room without opening his mouth. Brianna tried again. I think everybody's emotions got heightened that day, and things happened that shouldn't have happened, but now it's turning into something bigger, and I don't understand why it had to go this far. There it was. Not why did he do that to you? Not why did I freeze? Why did it have to go this far? Meaning the real offense in her mind was no longer the blanket, the insult, the silence. It was my response. I stood up and walked to the window. You still think this started when I acted? I said. No. Yes, I said quietly. You do. She began crying then, but even that sounded confused, not broken open. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do. Marcus said. I cut across her. I am not asking what Marcus said. Another pause. Then softly, I didn't want everything to fall apart. I closed my eyes for 1 second. That was the most honest thing she had said to me in days. Not justice, not dignity, not truth, comfort. You made your choice already, I said. You just thought I would keep paying for it. She started to answer, but I was finished needing understanding from her, finished reaching for the right arrangement of words that might let me feel less abandoned than I had been. Seeking understanding had kept me soft too long. Clarity was harder, better too. And on the other end of the line, her breathing changed, not because she suddenly agreed, because for the first time she understood I was no longer speaking from hurt. I was speaking from decision. They had treated my generosity like a utility bill. For the first time, it had an off switch. I did not have to raise my voice to watch a room begin withdrawing from him. That was the thing Marcus never understood about real consequence. He thought power lived in who could speak the strongest, smile the smoothest, recover the fastest. He thought if a man kept his posture clean enough, people would keep handing him the benefit of assumption forever. But posture is only useful while paper stays quiet. Once records begin speaking, a room changes in smaller ways first. It had already started before I arrived. Denise met me outside the conference suite on the 3rd floor of a downtown office building with windows too tall and carpet too soft for people who still believed in luck. She was holding a slim folder against her side, her expression flat in the way it got when she was fully prepared and no longer interested in being liked. "You don't need to say much today," she told me. "I know. That bothers men like him more." We walked in together. Marcus was already there with 2 other men and 1 woman seated near the end of the long table, all of them dressed in that polished kind of caution people wear when something has gone wrong, but nobody wants to admit yet that it may be theirs. Marcus stood when I entered, not out of respect, out of reflex. Some old instinct in him still remembered what his mouth had tried to erase. And he looked good. That mattered. Men like Marcus often do look good right before the room turns on them. Suit sharp, haircut close, jaw set. He was performing steadiness so hard I could almost hear the strain beneath it. "Cassandra," he said. I took my seat without answering. That was the first shift. Small. But I saw it land. Denise began. No heat, no speeches, just dates, positions, documented communication, representations made under changing conditions, and one very clean trail that made it impossible for Marcus to keep pretending my guarantor standing had remained untouched while he moved to preserve his own flexibility. She did not accuse him of being reckless. She showed the room how carefully he had tried to stay one step ahead of disclosure. The woman at the far end of the table stopped writing before Denise finished her second page. One of the men removed his glasses and cleaned them, though there was nothing on them. Marcus tried to interrupt once. Denise let him speak exactly 4 words before placing another document on the table and saying, "Please don't make this worse by correcting records you haven't read." That was the second shift. His confidence did not collapse. It thinned. You could see it in the way he leaned back too slowly, in the pause before he answered simple questions, in the sudden care with which everyone around him stopped using words like temporary and routine. Nobody in that room called him a fraud. They did not need to. More painful than accusation is reconsideration. Then Brianna walked in. I had not known she was coming. For a second, all the air in me changed direction. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Her face was bare, her mouth set too firmly, like she had come holding herself together by force. She did not sit beside Marcus. She sat 2 chairs down from him and kept her hands folded over each other so tightly I knew they must have hurt. Marcus looked at her once, quick and sharp. She did not look back. That was the third shift, not legal, personal, human. When Denise finished, the room stayed quiet long enough for truth to settle where it wanted. No one rushed to rescue him. No one softened the shape of what had been laid out. Marcus finally turned toward me, and for the first time since this began, I saw something in his face that looked less like control and more like comprehension, not remorse. Recognition, and he had misjudged the one person holding him up. I stood before he could say my name again. Across the table, my daughter looked at me like she was seeing the cost of her silence from the inside for the first time, and nobody in that room reached to stop me when I walked out. The part people imagine wrong about consequence is the timing. They think once the room changes, once the papers land, once the truth gets enough air around it, the guilty collapse and the innocent feel better. They think resolution comes with some clean emotional reward for having endured what you endured. It doesn't. Most of the time, it just gets quieter. And in that quiet, you finally hear what the damage actually cost. By the following week, Marcus's name was still moving through the same circles, just not the same way. Denise didn't call me with drama. She called me with updates. A review has widened, she said that morning. 2 additional parties have requested clarification before proceeding. That was how she spoke. Plain, measured. But what she meant was this. The questions were no longer contained. A deal he was depending on has been formally paused, she added. Not delayed. Paused. I didn't respond right away. Paused was a different word. Delayed could recover. Paused meant someone had stepped back and decided to watch. And one more thing, Denise said. The intermediary he contacted earlier. They've requested revised documentation before continuing any discussion. Meaning whatever confidence he had been trading on had been called in. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat there for a moment longer than I needed to. And that was the first time something had been taken out of his hands, not slowed, not questioned, stopped, but not everywhere. Later that afternoon, Denise called back. One party is still moving with him, she said. I stilled. On what basis? I asked. History, she said, and hesitation to admit they may have misjudged him. That made sense. People don't like correcting themselves in public. They hold on longer than they should. What does that mean for him? I asked. It buys him time, she said, not stability. Time. That was the last currency he had left. And for them? I asked. They're exposed now too, she said. They just haven't accepted it yet. I ended the call slowly, so it hadn't collapsed cleanly. Of course it hadn't. Real structures don't fall all at once. They split. Some parts give way. Others hold too long. And that delay, that's where the real cost starts collecting. After that, the rest followed the way it always does, quietly. People began stepping back from Marcus in exactly the way they had once leaned in, subtly, strategically, and without wanting to be caught admitting the shift too early. One meeting moved without him. Another was rescheduled. A return call took too long. Someone who had once responded within minutes now needed a full day to circle back. And then came the part that doesn't look like much until you understand what it means. A vendor reduced his terms, not canceled, reduced. 30 days where he once had 60. That was pressure. That was someone deciding not to stand too close anymore. And somewhere else. Someone decided to stand just a little longer. That was the danger. Marcus had built a life around being received well, around looking stable enough, sharp enough, composed enough that people would keep assuming substance where there was mostly pressure. Once that assumption cracked, everything around him had to decide whether it wanted to be standing there when the weight settled. Some stepped back, some hesitated, and a few stayed just long enough to make the fall worse when it came. I was in my living room when Brianna called again. The afternoon light was thin and gray, and I had been sitting still long enough for the quiet in the house to begin sounding deliberate. When her name lit up, I looked at it for one full ring before answering. Hello? She did not say Mama this time. She said, I didn't know it was this bad. I stood and walked slowly toward the window. What part? The silence on her end was different now, less arranged, less careful. All of it, she said. I knew things were tight. I knew he kept telling me it was temporary. I knew he didn't want me talking to you about certain things because he said it would make you worry, and then her voice thinned. I didn't think it had spread this far. Spread. As if rot needed permission. I didn't interrupt her. I kept thinking if I stayed calm, if I didn't push too hard, if I just let him handle it, things would settle down. She let out a shaky breath. I know how that sounds now. Yes, I said, you do. No anger in it, just fact. She started crying then, and this time it didn't sound polished. It sounded tired. Tired of holding shape around something collapsing in her hands. I was ashamed, she said. Not of you. A pause. Of what it would mean if he wasn't who he said he was. Of what it would mean if I had helped him build something that wasn't steady. That was closer to truth than she had been with me in weeks. I leaned one shoulder against the wall and let her keep talking until she ran out of words and only breathing remained. Then I said, "You confused peace with silence." She didn't argue. And you confused support with permission. Still nothing. I could have comforted her then. Part of me even knew exactly how. But comfort given too early becomes another way of helping people avoid the full shape of what they've done. So I stayed with her. Not warmly, not cruelly, just honestly. When we finally hung up, the house felt even quieter than before. Not empty, not broken. Just cleared of illusion in one more direction. That was the cost of being right too late. Not the satisfaction people imagine, not the clean ending, just this. Marcus was no longer moving forward, and my daughter was learning, piece by piece, what it meant to have stood beside him while he mistook my silence for weakness. The children in my cafeteria still called my name the same way they always had. That turned out to matter more than I expected. By the time the last chapter of that mess had finished writing itself in other people's offices, on other people's phones, and across tables where my name had once been used like quiet collateral, I was back where trays slid, milk cartons tipped, and somebody always needed an extra napkin before they asked for one. The fluorescent lights still hummed, and the floor still needed mopping by noon. One little boy still tried to bargain for a second roll every Thursday, like we had not been having the same conversation for half a school year. Nothing in that room had changed to honor what I had survived. That was the mercy of it. The world Marcus respected had shifted around him because records forced it to. The world I belonged to had never needed documents to tell it who I was. Children do not care about polished men and their borrowed confidence. They care whether you remember they hate peas, whether you notice they are quieter than usual, whether you hand them their tray like they matter before the day has had a chance to convince them otherwise. By lunchtime, I had tied my apron tighter, laughed once at something silly, and then corrected two boys who thought whispering while shoving each other made the shoving disappear. Routine settled around me like something earned, not glamorous, not loud, just real. That evening, when I got home, the house met me with the kind of silence that no longer felt wounded. I changed clothes, washed my hands, and stood in my bedroom a moment before opening the closet door. The blanket was still where I had placed it, folded once, then folded again. Cream yarn, soft green border. 10 months of mornings, evenings, and all the small acts of love that had filled the spaces in between. I lifted it carefully and laid it across the bed. For a long minute, I only looked at it. I remembered my hands making it before they ever trembled around it. The thought I had carried stitch by stitch, my grandbaby will be warm under this. And I remembered the apartment, the laugh, the shoe, the silence. Then I let those memories pass through me without inviting them to sit down. The truth was, the blanket had changed meaning 3 times. First, it had been love. Then it had become humiliation. Now it was decision. My daughter had called twice since that last honest conversation. I answered once. We spoke carefully, like two people crossing damaged ground and refusing to pretend it was smooth. She cried less. She said things more plainly. That mattered. But plainness is not the same thing as repair, and repair is not the same thing as access. Marcus had not called at all. That mattered too. When I sat on the edge of the bed with the blanket in my lap and understood something I wish I had learned earlier. Not everything made in love must be delivered where it was first intended. Sometimes love survives by being redirected before contempt can reach it again. So I folded it once more, slowly, properly, and placed it into a clear storage box I had bought on my way home. Not trash, not punishment, not return, just removal from hands that had not known what they were stepping on. One day, maybe, that blanket would belong to a child who received it honestly. Maybe my grandchild, if truth ever grew strong enough in that house to carry it without shame. Maybe another baby who came into the world needing warmth more than performance. I did not have to decide that tonight. Yet it was enough to know I had decided this much. What I made was never small. What I gave was never cheap. And what they tried to humiliate was never theirs to define. I closed the lid on the box, slid it gently onto the closet shelf, and turned off the bedroom light. They thought they were stepping on a blanket. They were stepping on the hands that held them up.